All right. Welcome back to the EO360 podcast. This is the second part of a two-part series. In the last episode, we heard from a rather senior level exec about his transformation, his fitness transformation, and the importance of wellness in the life of an entrepreneur. And then today, I got my trainer on the line, and admittedly, I think Craig has some pretty extreme positions about things. In fact, this morning, we got a pretty healthy debate in the gym about some things. But having said that, I've had the privilege of seeing Craig without a shirt on, and it's pretty dang awesome. I'll tell you that right now. So let's see what Craig has to say about fitness. Craig Huntington, welcome to this podcast. I've never had I never referenced somebody with their clothes off in the introduction before.
All right. I like to be the first. That's great.
Yeah, that is you are the first that
All right.
where I've said you look pretty damn good without a shirt on.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
But I say that a little mostly facetiously, but I with respect, because how old are you, Craig?
I'm going to be 55 in June.
All right. So we're the same age-ish.
Yep.
Give or take a couple months. And, my entire life, there's a little bit of vanity here, but my entire life I've been chasing a body like yours. Like I've always wanted to look. I think just about any guy would like to look like they just got out of the gym. And while I know at the age of 55, I think it becomes a little less about the vanity of how you're going to look on the beach and a little bit more about comfort and longevity of life. Like now we look at mortality and we look at mobility and the ability to continue to perform doing the things we like to do when we're well into our 60s and 70s and even the 80s.
Sure. Yeah.
In fact, I think, Craig, when you and I are 80, in about 25 years from now, when we're 80, I believe that's going to be the new 60. And
I agree.
We have a long way to go after 80, I believe.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've been a trainer for 32 years.
Yep.
I'm really curious. I'm in tech and in software. Things have changed so much in 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. What's changed in the world of fitness in 32 years?
I think, to be honest with you, I think the fitness has gotten worse. The ideas have gotten worse. They've always been pretty bad. From kind of the inception. Well, no, seriously.
Like that's not
the inception of the fitness industry. I mean, if you think about like the fitness industry is like any industry is about selling products and ideas, and the sales of products and ideas has a lot of times it's basically been in contradiction to the right ideas or the ideas that are really beneficial because they're not necessarily profitable. Like the thing that people get bored of activities, right? They get bored of exercise or they get bored of, for example, like the Jane Fonda, right? Jane Fonda came along and she sold her aerobics program. And then Billy Blanks came along and sold Tybo, and then the Peloton comes along, and it's basically they're selling the same thing, but they're just repackaging it to make it more entertaining.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the ideas, like there's only a handful of good ideas on any one subject, and I think that's one of the biggest problems with the fitness industry. And this has been since the modern fitness industry, the dawn of it was probably like the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And then probably got a real boost in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And then it's just, it's gotten bigger. The industry's gotten bigger, but I think the ideas have gotten worse.
So I want to come back to the Jane Fonda thing and the Peloton thing. I'm going to put that on ice for a minute, though.
Okay.
We'll get back to, and where I'm going with that is the endurance, the cardio versus strength. So we'll come back to Jane Fonda. There's a thing I haven't heard.
I'm basically describing fads, right? Fads happen in every industry.
So you said something like it's getting worse, and like all I can picture is this kid on Instagram that for a little while I was seeing. I don't remember his name, but like he'd always show up on Instagram without a shirt on. Kid's jacked, like he's buff. He's kind of like a younger version of you.
Yep.
He's probably 25 or 30, and he has
Yep.
this program, and he's all about like everybody's doing it wrong. You got to do it this way, and it's just so salesy and gimmicky.
Yep.
It makes it sound like it's so easy, and
Yep.
and that's what I think you mean by this. By all the fads, like just
Yeah.
give me $100 a month and you'll get fit, you'll get jacked
Yeah.
like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like but that's been the business forever. And I don't teach anything as easy. What I try to teach is it should be simple. You shouldn't have to create like a new 9-to-5 job to become or to reach the upper limits of your physical potential. That's what I try to teach. That's what I've been doing since 1994. I became a trainer. I started selling training because the ideas worked really well for me. So I tried to, I worked with some people like close to me, my mom, my brother, and I kind of like experimented on them. I experimented on myself first.
That was back in high school, I think. No, you weren't in high school in the 90s. You
94. I was a senior in college.
Okay.
I was a senior in college. I had been into weight training since I was 12. So I've been involved in the health and fitness industry in one way or another for 42 years.
Mm-hmm.
But when I actually thought about becoming a personal trainer, I basically learned that I could actually do this for a living. I found this one idea and it worked again really well for me. And I thought, hey, it might work for other people. It did. And then that's when I decided to turn it into a business.
This one idea. All right. We're going to get to that one second. So what I want to go back to something you said a minute ago, or the theme so far that I'm getting out of this is the fads are cool. If that inspires you, that's fine. Sure. But I think what I'm hearing from you and what I know about you is your philosophy is like, and I forgot exactly where I got this, but it's smart, consistent training. Oh yeah, you sent me some notes beforehand. That's where I got this. Smart, consistent training beats complicated programs every time. And I think that's just it. It's just the hard work. It's just the regular visits to the gym, doing it over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
That's what makes the difference. It's the consistency. And that's what's really hard. Like that's the hard part.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that's also why, in all fairness, Craig, that's why we know each other, because I found myself going through these spurts where I would hit the gym. I belong to a Planet Fitness or something. I'd go for a little while and then I just kind of stop. And then I built a gym in my garage and I would do that for a little while. And then once the novelty wears off, it would stop. And so I've set up a time with you where essentially all I need to do is show up. And then you help me get through the rest. Now, what's also really interesting is your sessions are very, very short. And they're far from easy, but they're super short. So let's go back to that one thing. What was the one thing you learned that changed your perspective of, and I'm going to get away from the word fitness and go more into strength training, because that's your specialty is strength. Strength training. What was that one thing you learned that changed your perspective?
I started strength training on a regular serious basis when I was 15 and a half. And I did it for football. I responded really well to it. Became really strong, built a lot of muscle really fast. And then
is that generally the time when people see the most potential is like going through puberty? Like
I think it's a great time for especially for boys to start, because they catch that wave of their increased testosterone along with the training, which also is stimulates stimulates those hormones, those muscle building hormones, testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1. There's certain hormones that basically your body is kind of stimulated to release. It's given a reason with that really intense physical activity. So that, yeah, I think it's a great time to start. And that's where I kind of hit the ground running. And, what happened was I took the more is better belief, like most people do it, but most young men, especially when it comes to like weight training, they look to the biggest guy in the gym, and they that's where they get their advice from. How did he get so big? And I'm gonna go ask him. And
he's there every time you go to the gym. He's there.
Yep, he's there every day. He's there for hours. And so more is better, right? The more exercises, the more sets, repetitions, the more minutes, more hours you spend in the gym, the more days, the better the results. So I believe that. And what happened was I started to
believe have these past tense. That's past. You believe.
Oh yeah, this is that. I believe this 40 years ago.
That goes against your current methodology.
Oh my God,
so I want to be very
180
clear.
degrees. Yep. Yeah. So what happened was this was my epiphany was my elbows really started to, they almost felt like they're going to fall apart, like bad, like tendonitis, both left and right. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way.
There is cortisone.
So, I didn't even know about cortisone back then. I was kind of looking for a better way. I've always liked efficiency. I've always liked to try to make, not that I'm like, well, I shouldn't say this. I am lazy. Like I have a natural lazy gene. So I've always tried to figure out an easier way to do things, but do things right.
We call that efficiency in entrepreneurship, Craig.
Well, I kind of like walk a fine line between efficiency and laziness. But I've always tried to find the most efficient way to do things. And so I thought, I don't think I'm stupid. I don't think I'm a genius, but I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. So it was about the summer of 1993. That's when I started to think this way. And I had kind of cut down a little bit compared to what I was doing. And then my roommate in college was a competitive bodybuilder, and he convinced me to do a competition. And he was training 5 to 6 days a week, weight training. And then he was doing steady state or cardio 6 to 7 days a week.
Was that mean steady state in, what'd you say?
A steady state, like any kind of like cardio machine or biking or jogging. They call it it's steady state activity. Like you're continuously moving, whereas like strength training would be you train and then you stop. It's basically burst and repeat is strength, lifting weights for most people. And so I followed his advice because he was phenomenal. He's one of probably the best natural bodybuilders that I've ever met. Like if he took steroids, he would have been a professional bodybuilder. That's the kind of genetics he had. And so I respected him. I followed his advice. I did really well, but I was getting beat up. I was training, I don't know, hours every week and getting beat up. And by the end, even though I did well in my competition, even though it was the best shape I'd ever been in, I was so tired and so almost lifeless. And I said, it just continued with this idea that there's got to be a better way. And what happened was I read an article, just one article in a muscle magazine by a guy named Mike Mentzer. And that was like, I didn't even have to try his suggested routine. It clicked as soon as I read the article because there was so much, it just made so much damn sense. And then I decided to wait until after my competition to start training this way. But once I did the first workout, it took me like 17 minutes total. And I said, I'm never going back ever. And that was almost 32 years ago. And I've never gone back.
What did anything change in your physique or the way you felt? Like what was the impact of the shift in process?
So when I started at 15 and a half, basically 15 and a half to 18, I made really fantastic gains in strength and size. But as soon as that like high volume, more is better crept in, then I was stagnant. I wasn't changing at all. And then also that overuse pain, overuse problems. That's when they reared their ugly head.
Yeah.
So I was basically for 7 years, I was making like almost no progress. And then all of a sudden I took Mike Mentzer's advice to heart, and all of a sudden I made progress again. And then there was another big jump from like age 23 to let's say age 25. where I was doing weights I'd never done before. I was building more muscle than I had. I basically think I reached the upper limits of my potential by the time I was 25. Not that I haven't made progress since, but it's been like drips and drabs. And that's the one thing that I love about the philosophy is you basically, if you do this thing right, you should be where your ultimate development, you should reach your ultimate development very quickly.
Is there a difference between, like you said, bodybuilding competitions? I think you said, is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Is there a difference between bodybuilding, like body sculpting, and I don't know if there's other words, but are there different versions of that, or is it pretty much all just the same thing?
I mean, when we talk about like a physique competition, I think they've like created a bunch of different categories, and a lot of it has to do with like professional, amateur, steroid use. Like they have drug competitions that aren't tested and competitions that are drug tested. So there's, but it's all the same thing. It's
all bodybuilding.
You try to show off your physique. You try to get as lean. You try to get as muscular and as lean as you can. You try to lose as much fat and keep as much muscle, and then you show your muscle. And that's essentially what it is.
All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts here, so to say. So talk to me about, so we've got like, I broke this up as I've been thinking about fitness leading into this 2-part series. I've been thinking about a few different categories, and I might have told you like 4. I think.
Yeah, you said mental toughness or mental strength or mental. I know the first one was mental.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. Where's that one in my notes? Okay, so let me just go through them. I might.
Sure.
I might add that one. So we got strength, which is yours. Yes. That's where. I think like 90% of your energy goes into strength and what you encourage people to focus on. There's nutrition. There's, in this no particular order. There's core. Actually, now I have 6 of them. I'm just going to keep adding things. Yeah. Core. Then there's mobility, which I think you could put core and mobility in the same category. I think maybe. And then you have cardio and endurance, which we got in a big debate about this morning. Yep. And then you have, of course, mental fitness, which is, you might put in the category of like meditation or journaling or reading for me. It's just things that breathing might be like mental fitness. We're going to talk a little bit less about that right now, although that would be an interesting third part to this is the mental element of fitness. So let's get into, let's talk about strength. And as we talk about strength, I think we're going to get into topics about nutrition, core, mobility, and cardio as well. And when I say cardio and endurance to me are the same thing. Okay. One really interesting note, I think. So, I enjoy running. Running has been the thing that I've done consistently for the past 35 years or so. And when you look at elite marathoners, something that I had to remind myself and all my running buddies had to remind ourselves is that, like, we always believe more is better, more mileage. And like back in the 70s, the guys like Bill Rogers, like these guys were doing 120-mile weeks, 40-mile weeks, which is outrageous.
But Bill Rogers was a marathon runner, right? He didn't run. Like, so when you...
and I'm talking mostly marathon running right now, not sprinting, not not short distance. Like I'm talking marathon, but these guys are doing high mileage. Nothing else. Very little strength training. Is just all running on the roads. I don't think I ever broke 80 miles in a week. And that was like extreme for me. The typical marathon training may be 40 to 60 miles, which is also difficult to maintain that level of running for an amateur runner. But more is better was always my mentality. Sure. When I started learning more about Kenyan runners who dominated and still do to a certain degree marathon running, one of their training tactics is they have the hard days, they have their light days. And on their light days, they run slower than I run on my light day. By the way, these guys are running nearly twice as fast as me in a marathon. Right. And they're running slower than me on my slow days. So I think that's really fascinating. If the elite marathoners can really rest on rest days.
Yeah.
And that says something.
Yeah.
So talk to me. Tell me what makes up a good strength training program.
So for training, you got to think about what the stimulus is, right? What is forcing your body to make the change? And we talked about more is better. So I think a marathon runner versus a sprinter is a good example of this. And there's obviously genetics at play, tremendous genetics. Like marathon runners, like the Kenyan marathon champions they're born. I'm not taking away from their hard work or their strategy or any of that. It's just they are born to run marathons. Like they have the perfect bodies. They don't take as much punishment as you or I would, or even someone bigger than us.
And there's a lot of genetics built into it too, because for generations they've been going everywhere by foot. You know, the all the way down, and I've seen some documentaries on this, herding animals and chasing them on foot, all the way down to like running to school in the morning, miles to school every morning, and back home every day. Like
but at the same time, if you sent one of your kids to Kenya to do that and train exactly like those guys, he would not sniff a marathon win like a Boston. No, he would. No, he would do great. He would do better than he normally would. He would get the best training probably on the planet. Yeah, but he's not going to even come close to those guys.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not taking away from their hard work and their, the strategy.
Genetics plays a role for sure.
Same with sprinters, world-class sprinters, where they pop out of the womb with all the genetic material to become world-class sprinters. Now, this is kind of getting away from the reason I brought up marathon runners and sprinters is if the amount of work done produce larger muscles, the marathon runner, the Kenyan would have massive lower bodies.
Yeah.
So where you have world-class sprinters, and the longest sprint is the 400. That's what do they run that in, like less than 40 seconds?
No idea.
It's like less than 40 seconds that they're running the 400.
Okay.
And a lot of them are doubled over at the end. A lot of them throw up at the end of a 400. So they have the largest, most muscular legs, or comparatively to the marathon runner. So why do the sprinters, who like the volume is like, I don't even know a percentage, it's probably like 1% of what marathon runners do, right? Why do the sprinters have the larger, more muscular legs? It was the intensity of the work that they did. Like you can't sprint a marathon.
Yep.
So
intensity is the first
intensity of effort. Yeah. It's effort over time. And the higher the effort, the less time you can spend. Like there's not a choice. You can't choose to, when someone says I train really, really hard for 2 hours, they have no idea what it means to train really hard. You can't train hard.
I guess relative for the amount of time. So it's intensity over time.
Yes.
That is the key. So like if you work really hard for 4 minutes and you're super intense, then it's the kind of the equivalent of running less hard for 16 minutes.
Yeah.
So I mean the formula is the same. It's just a lower effort, longer period of time.
I'll give you a story.
The intensity,
you like stories, right? Yeah, definitely.
I think I'm overcomplicating it. Your message is that intensity is important.
So I'll give you an example, a story about a client of mine who was a Division I. He ran track at Villanova, and he ran the 400. Now, the first time I trained him, I wasn't as experienced. This was probably 25 years ago when I trained him, and I could get kind of overzealous with people that I knew could take it. Kind of like it's almost like it wasn't even like a conscious thing. It's just I got excited when they had the motor ability, the mental toughness. And this was his first time training. Now, he was a well-conditioned guy. I mean, he ran the 400. He was like, if you looked at him on the street in a short and t-shirts, he's in great shape, like super muscular kid. And then training him was an absolute pleasure. But every time I trained him, towards the end of the workout, he would almost look like he was in shock. Like he'd turn like almost like a grayish color. And then he'd politely ask me to leave when he was done. And he did this maybe 3 or 4 times, the first few workouts, or the first few weeks, I should say. And I was like, what is this kid doing? And I would go outside and watch him. He would be behind the dumpster at my gym, puking his brains out. And I was like,
good.
I said, no. I said, John, do you do that every time? He's like, yeah. And he's like, I used to do this after every 400. So thank God he had that experience, because he just thought it was normal just to throw up after a hard workout.
What is your
Not
thought on that? Like, what is
well,
that? What does that mean if somebody's throwing up?
There's something that has to do with your body heating. Throwing up in that situation, I believe, is a way for your body to cool down, not just like it has to cool down quickly. So that the throwing up is a way to do that. And just for whatever reason, he could train so intensely, and it would. I'm probably not the best descriptor here. It was almost like his body got so revved up and so hot so quickly that he had to like throw up to make himself feel better. He didn't. Now, this was something that after a few weeks he didn't do anymore, because his body was conditioned to the workout. Like it wasn't like he wasn't in condition, or like he wasn't conditioned to do this kind of workout. And because he had the mental toughness, the coordination, the genetic, his muscles were just used to firing like a. I think that's why he had that reaction. But once he conditioned to that, then he didn't. Like, I don't want to scare people away and think that everyone, like, you have to throw up or it isn't a good workout.
I never have.
Stupid like that. So, yeah, I've never done it either. So I've felt queasy and nauseous after like a really hard workout, but never that, you know.
So let me go down that path for a second, because I'm more of a endurance athlete than I am a strength athlete, which is why big reason why I'm seeing you, because I just don't have the experience to do this on my own effectively.
Sure.
And I realize as I'm getting into my 50s, like well into my 50s now, like it's much, much more important for my well-being, my wellness, that I focus on strength and endurance.
Yeah.
So having said that, like I've done some Ironmans where in the Ironman, one of the biggest challenges is keeping nausea away. Because it's you have to fuel during a 10 to 12 hour race. You've got to fuel up. And so you're eating things, and I mean, you could eat gels, those you can process those easier. Yeah. But sometimes you need a little substance. And so people eat potatoes, like cooked potatoes, put them in tin foil, put them in their shirt, and, you got a potato. I actually remember making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that every now and then I would pop a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But you're walking a fine line there, because when you eat something, and I don't know if this has any relationship to somebody throwing up after a hard workout, but when you eat something, you're putting things in your belly, and your belly needs blood to process to digest it. And so it brings blood away from your muscles and into your abdomen to process the foods. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say high fat foods are more likely to require blood.
Yes.
I'm getting into the science.
No, you're right. Because like the best thing you could do in those competitions, like an Ironman, or like the people that run the Western States 100s and things like that, is you have to eat a simple, I would imagine, going by what I know, simple carbohydrates would take less energy to digest, right?
And that's why peanut butter and chocolate is not necessarily a good thing, because it has fat in it. And so we got to be careful with eating high fat foods during a race. Anyway, that's just that's not the science. That's just me, my experience. Anyway, having said that, that was just a little bit about nausea. Let's get back to the keys of strength. So the first thing is centered around intensity. Yeah, exactly. Now, you said something to me which is really interesting, because I've always thought about strength training as doing multiple sets of the same thing. Yep. And bursting up and then coming down slowly. Burst up and come down slowly. I'm thinking about bench press, for example. Yep. Mm-hmm. But that is not your approach.
It doesn't really matter how fast or slow you move the weight. We're trying to recruit basically as many motor units or muscle fibers within whatever muscle you're trying to target. And you try to get to the point where basically you recruit all available motor units. And that can happen without any movement at all. That's when, I think I said this to you today, exercise has nothing to do with movement, or movement has nothing to do with exercise. You can do, and I don't know if I've had you use a time static hold yet. I mean, I've had.
Are you talking about like just hanging with your arms, like hang from bar with your arms at 90 degrees and just sitting there?
Yep.
Locking in.
Yep.
And that's as good as a pull-up?
As far as trying to stimulate the muscles involved in a pull-up, yes. Because your body doesn't know, your muscles only know, your muscles function is to produce force. That is it. Each muscle produces force. You use resistance and force, or make your muscle produce force against resistance. So your muscle doesn't know where the resistance is coming from. And so muscle can move your body, but muscle's important for you have to use your muscles to move your body, but you also use your muscles to keep your body from being moved.
Explain that one a bit more to me.
So your muscles, you need muscles to keep your body from moving.
Oh, right. If you're sitting,
think about if you're in like a hurricane, right?
If you're in a hurricane,
you're hanging on for dear life, right? That's so we do probably as much. I like most people know it as like an isometric contraction, as much static contracting as we do moving, as far as our muscles are concerned throughout a day, right? If you pick up like a cup, like a coffee cup, you're statically holding that. You're not. I mean, obviously you're tipping it, but anytime you're holding something, you're basically doing that. Your muscles don't know the difference between holding something or moving it up and down. So that's why that's why exercise doesn't equal movement.
All right. So we got intensity, speed, doesn't matter. Motion is not really a factor.
It's intensity of effort. Yep. Motion
doesn't
matter.
So you push to fail. Why not do multiple sets of this, or multiple sets of the same
sets of each exercise? Yeah. So there's a principle. It's called Henneman size principle. I think the researcher's name was, I think it was Dr. Edward Henneman. And I want to say it was like early 1960s. I don't know the exact date, but he discovered that strength and size, the muscle size, was built on basically when you recruit all available motor units. And when they're all recruited, and that's why going to failure is so important, because that's when you guarantee that you've recruited all available motor units. If you don't go to failure, you could still possibly recruit all available. You could possibly recruit all the motor units available by not going to failure, but you can guarantee it by going to failure. Once you've done that, there's no need to repeat that. You've already stimulated that process. So doing multiple sets, in my opinion, is like beating a dead horse. It's like if you turn on a light switch, you don't need to keep flipping it to keep it on, right? That's the same idea. It's like you turn that light switch on. So the going to failure is like flipping the light switch on. And then once that process starts, and the process happens when you're not training, the process of building muscle mass, getting stronger, that happens when you're resting. That's why the more is better thing, that's where it fails, or that's where it doesn't take into account the rest factor is probably of equal importance to the workout. That's when your body's producing the change that the workout merely stimulates.
How many, so in your workouts with me last, like, I don't know, 25 minutes? Maybe?
No, not even. Probably not even.
So it's 20 to 25 minutes, and I know that's with a lot of chit chat in between. But essentially,
it's all productive though. So
we have like,
and plus,
I've never counted, but maybe 8 exercises that we do. We go one to another to another. There's not much of a break in between.
No.
It's super high intensity. There's very slow motion to failure, and and that's we're doing that 2 days a week. Now I'm running other days. I do this core workout with some friends another day. So there's a collection of other things going on, but 2 days a week I focus on strength with you. If somebody were interested in really doubling down on the strength, would you recommend maybe even getting into body shaping? They want to actually shape their body in a different way. Would you recommend, I mean, I hear my kids talk about, back and shoulders day or arms.
Oh, you're talking about split routines?
Yeah. Do you, I mean, is that a thing you recommend?
I prefer a full body routine. So
every time you work out, you would do a full body routine.
Me personally, I like a full body routine. I found most people do best on a full body routine. My average client trains between 2 and 3 times a week. I'll start someone off if they want to train 3 times a week. I'll start them off on a full body routine, and then that gets pretty demanding, pretty fast. So then, if they want to continue to do 3 times a week, then I'll break it into a split routine, like an upper lower split. Split to me doesn't really matter. If you like a certain split, if you like to split your body parts, great. If you don't, if you want to do full body, like when I do my online coaching, I always ask people, what do you prefer to do? What kind of time do you have in the gym? There are options. I'm not like I'm not like, married to full body or splits or anything like that.
So is there anything else from a strength perspective that if somebody's doing their own routine, they so push to fail. Mm-hmm. There's been times when I will do, like 15 plus reps before I fail.
Yep.
Which goes against what I remember being taught, which was like, high weights should only do like 6 to 8 of them before stopping. What's the difference between doing 8 at a higher weight than 15 at a lower rate? If both of them go to the point of failure.
It's the only thing that is really important is that you progress beyond that. Like if you do better, some people do better with a higher like repetition range or a higher time under load is another measurement. I measure time under load instead of counting repetitions. It's just I think a more accurate way to measure progress. There's nothing magical about it. But if you're doing, let's say 6 to 8 repetitions, and then you keep making progress within that 6 to 8 repetition range, stay with it. And some people do better with higher repetitions, just because for whatever reason they just do better. I don't know if there's the genetic component to it or, but progress. Train to failure and train progressively. Always try to push beyond that limit. On a week-to-week basis.
This is one of the first extreme perspectives you have. What I'm about to ask about, I think. We had a conversation this morning, and you said something like we were talking about soccer, or football, and you're like, that's not exercise. You don't consider sports like tennis exercise. Right. What do you think? How would you define exercise?
Exercise is so it's a strategy for physical improvement. It's it should be done in the constraints of safety. Injury should never be considered when you exercise. It would be a contradiction as to why you're doing it in the first place. And the reason I don't consider sports exercise is because sports have an injury component built in. Like it's par for the course. And so to choose like a sport, some people think that they're just going to choose whatever activity they enjoy doing, and that'll be their exercise.
Yeah, I've been there for like 30 years.
Which sounds like it makes sense, but at the same time, if that activity has potential to injure you, like again, it's a contradiction. You're trying to build your body up. You're trying to create almost like you're trying to fortify your body with exercise. When you stimulate your skeletal muscles, you stimulate all the systems, the subsystems that are in place to serve the needs of your skeletal muscles. Like you're going to increase the strength of your connective tissue, your bones. There's even, I don't think there's any evidence you can strengthen your internal organs, but when your muscles are stronger and more efficient, you make the work of those organs a lot easier. The heart, the liver, any of those organs are the job of those organs is made much easier with stronger, more efficient muscles. So if you're playing a sport, and again, when you're playing tennis, the goal is to win, right? Or to play tennis and be competitive or have fun with it. You're going to dive for a ball and potentially get injured, but that's part of the game. You can't mitigate that.
So you've also said to me that like injury generally comes from like fast tweak motion, like moving quickly, doing something really, really fast is what's going to cause injury most of the time.
Yes. So
I'm thinking about sprinters. I'm thinking about even tennis elbow for that matter. I'm thinking about it, and I have a hard time challenging that. I think you're right. However, I also think that this is where you and I differ a little bit. I think endurance sports are incredibly valuable as part of the formula for fitness.
In what way?
Excellent question. I think, yeah, because sadly I don't have a great answer to that. Well,
you're going to say they build endurance, but then it gets back to our argument about endurance is skill specific.
And I think that's where we disagree.
See, I think recreation is a very valuable part of the human experience. I think recreational activities, and obviously some recreational activities that have made people millions and millions of dollars, but it's still all recreation, whether it's playing it at the highest level for money or whether it's just going out on the weekends. It's still recreational. Endurance, again, it's skill specific. And I'm not saying like those activities aren't valuable. There's a lot of great things about like you trained and ran a ton of marathons. A lot of great lessons to be learned by. There's the mental strength, mental toughness part about marathon training and running, being able to deal with like grueling situations. There's a lot of great things about it. I'm not dismissing recreational activities at all. My thing is you want to exercise to improve your ability to do recreational activities.
That is true. That is true. And the reason it improves them, but there's so much that's recreational in life that it to me that's just part of fitness, and also
here's the thing too. Yep. You have to be fit to do
running. I'm just going to go back to running. Yeah. When I go out and run and I can, if for anybody that can run even like 20 miles a week, like let's look on the lower end of what runner might do. So you're doing maybe 20 miles a week of running. Like that person is going to be able to do more things in their life comfortably than somebody that sits on the couch and doesn't run.
What if that person, instead of running, did 2 to 3 really hard full body strength training sessions a week?
Yeah, I don't know the answer
instead of running.
But you're making the proposition that somebody that does 2 to 3 really hard strength training sessions is just as capable of, walking 20 miles over the course of a day in the city on vacation. Like we've done that as a family.
So I'm a couch potato, big time, and I'm not like proud of that necessarily. I stopped playing sports a long time ago. I stopped doing anything other than what I do now. I know it's anecdotal, but you threw an anecdote out at me today, so I'm going to throw one back at you. There isn't anything that I've come up against since I really stopped doing anything but strength training that I haven't done really well with, like as far as like being physically fit enough to do. I mean, in the last, basically since 1994, there isn't anything I haven't been able to do and been like dying, and I'm talking skills that I hadn't done in years.
Yeah.
So, you ever been to St. Paul's?
St.
Like 528, London, St. Paul's Cathedral?
No, I haven't.
It's like 528 steps, right? Which it's not a big deal, but it's just like, I'm petrified of heights. But my kids were going to go up to the top of St. Paul's, and I'm like, I'm not going to look like an effing loser if my kids go up to the top and I don't, right? But in my head, I figured I could mitigate, or I could, it'd be less fearful if I did it as fast as possible.
And there's a good example. Like that's endurance, right? There's a lot of strength in climbing steps, but each step doesn't take a lot of power. To me, that is an endurance exercise. And I think I know the end of the story.
I got up to the top and got down in about 15 minutes total, and I wasn't breathing heavy at all. I wasn't sore the next day. Were. What's that?
I'll bet your kids were.
No, my kids are great. My kids are fit.
There's times which I love this. I'm going to brag about this because they don't listen to this. So there's been times when I'm again 50 something years old. I'll go out, my kids in their early 20s, and like I can smoke them going up, like climbing Mount Washington or going especially going out for a run, because that's just the nature of what I do. But it feels good to be fit to the level of being able to keep up with at least your 20-something-year-old kids.
Yeah. One day I went to, so have you ever done whitewater rafting on the Penobscot River, Millinocket, Maine?
Yeah.
So we did whitewater rafting.
Yeah,
On
just for reference, being in the Boston area, that's not uncommon for people in this area for
Yep.
some recreation to go up whitewater rafting in Maine. There's some great
Right.
rivers up there to raft on.
The day after we rafted, everyone decided we had one more day, and everyone decided let's go climb Mount Sentinel, which is it's next to Mount Katahdin, which is the highest peak I think in the east of the Mississippi.
And the hardest part of the Appalachian Trail, by the way. It's the end of the Appalachian Trail if you're going from south to north, and the Appalachian Trail is like this thing people do. It takes them months to do.
Right.
And they get to the very end, the Mount Katahdin, and it is intense. Yeah. Very rocky.
Sentinel's only like, I don't even think it's 6,000 feet, but I zipped up Sentinel like it was nothing. And I don't hike, I don't climb mountains, I don't do any of that stuff. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that the stuff that
you're making the point about endurance.
Yes. Yep. And I know it's an anecdote. And you know, I was always a good athlete. I was always pretty good at every sport I played. I could do sports now that I haven't done in years and be pretty good at them. So there's a genetic component to that. And I'm not saying that any of this stuff, like all this stuff you're talking about, can be extremely valuable for the individual, whether it's running, whether it's playing tennis, whether it's, you know, whatever it is. But I try to stress, you should strength train. That should be a requirement for life. Everything else you do after that is going to be much easier. You're going to be much less resistant to injury. And then the best thing about the way I train people, and I obviously think it's the best, that's why I do it, is it's the most time efficient, safest, effective program you'll ever do.
Time efficiency is pretty valuable. Like I've seen people train, you go to the gym, like Planet Fitness is a good example.
Yep.
You see people do multiple reps in between reps. I mean, sets, multiple sets. Yep. In between sets are sitting there on their phone for 5 minutes. And they're like, I guess I should do another set. So,
yep.
Hey, so we're running short on time, and I really want to get to the nutritional piece of it, because everything we're talking about when it comes to endurance is under the assumption that you're nutritionally fit too. And something that I've learned, and this is becoming common knowledge over the past several years, I think, we used to think that you could just out-exercise a bad diet.
Absolutely.
And that's just, it's become common knowledge now that is just not the case. Like diet represents 80% of how you look.
Sure.
And believe me, I have been running and running and running thinking that means I could eat anything. And I've never actually had like this physique that you have. And it's because I eat far too much.
Yeah.
And I probably eat a lot of the wrong things. You are a proponent, forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but I want to start the conversation here. You are a proponent that we really don't need much more than meat.
Yes. 1,000%.
Like red meat. Just eat red meat.
Yes.
And like even carbs, your opinion is we don't need bread. We don't need carbs at all.
We don't need any source of outside or exogenous carbohydrates. Human beings have never needed it. We evolved over 4.5 million years. We have a process in our body. It's pretty amazing. It's called gluconeogenesis. So any amount of glucose that our bodies need is produced by, it's basically made from either proteins or fats. So we don't need, like, if you eat carbohydrates, if you want to eat carbohydrates, more power to you. We do not need to eat carbohydrates. We don't need to eat any plant foods at all.
And so I just want to say, like, this is, neither one of us are doctors. That you have far more.
Well, the doctors don't know anything about nutrition, though. I would never go to a doctor to talk about nutrition. They're the last person I'd ever talk to about really about health and fitness is a mainstream Western medical doctor. They don't train in health and fitness. They learn about disease. They learn how to diagnose disease and how to treat symptoms. So I would never ask a doctor I mean, some of my biggest influences are actual medical doctors, but their knowledge of health and fitness went way outside what their medical training was.
So there's very likely some vegetarians or vegans listening to this. There's got to be. And I'd be curious, what is your message to them? Like what, in terms of, obviously it sounds like you think it's I know you're not a judgy person. That's not at all. I don't think there's judgment in there, but you don't subscribe to the perspective that a veggie-based diet is a healthy way to live.
I don't at all. I think it's a very unhealthy way to live. If someone asks me, Craig, should I become a plant-based eater, or should I become a vegan or a vegetarian? And if they're sincerely asking me, like, I'll say, no, you should not do that. That's like kind of anti-human.
Yeah.
I'm never going to try to convince someone who's a vegan or vegetarian not to be. Like, that's if someone's doing well with what they're doing, if they feel healthy, I'm not going to try to convince them otherwise. That's crazy. Just like I don't want anyone trying to convince me that the way I eat is wrong.
So, it's interesting, and this seems to be, you've been like this for a while, but this seems to be at least something I've been hearing a lot more about, which is just red meat, just eat a lot of meat. My neighbor, like literally across the street from me, he was the first person I talked to a couple of years ago who is just a carnivore. Like that's all he eats is meat for breakfast. You told me your diet once, you don't eat breakfast.
Right.
You're like a lion. You don't eat breakfast. You have a little bit of lunch, if I'm not mistaken. And then
I don't eat lunch at all.
You don't eat breakfast or lunch?
2 years I went to a strict OMAD. I did. Let me back up a little bit. So when I came back from my trip to Puerto Rico in February, I have been experimenting eating a lunch and a dinner, just for the hell of it, just to see what it would do. But I think I'm going to go back. So I'm going to go back to a 1 meal a day. I'm going to do like what I call a cut, like a bodybuilding style cut, April 20th, because my wife and I are going to Mallorca, Spain. So I always use like trips as like a kind of like a motivation to get into like bodybuilding competition shape, like really razor sharp. I just enjoy doing that. I enjoy doing cuts. I'm not miserable. I just enjoy it. So,
well, you said to me once, we were talking about diet, and like I'm in okay shape, but like I'm not.
Yeah, you're in really good shape. So
thank you.
You are in really good shape.
I appreciate that.
Well, before you met me too.
I don't totally agree with you. I think I appreciate it very much, but I could lose some weight, and I believe thank you. I'll just leave it at that. We were talking about, or I wanted to cut back on the amount I'm eating, and I'm looking for a routine.
Yeah.
And I started talking about it in a way, and you're like, almost immediate. You're like, you know what? You're going to fail at this. Like you probably do it because I have discipline, right? You'll do it. But then after 90 days or whatever, when you hit your goal, you're just going to bounce back. And it's because you said, I'm looking at it like a prison. I'm looking at it like a punishment.
Yes.
And you're like, it's a gift. Tell me more about that mentality you have, like the gift part of not eating cake. I sure do like cake, man. Yes. So recently, we had just had a big holiday recently, and a holiday where there's a lot of eggs and chocolate eggs and bunnies running around, and like I'm gonna tell you right now, Craig, I went batshit crazy yesterday on all the junk in our house. It was
Dave, I did too.
It would have been embarrassing if anybody saw how much junk food and ice cream and apple crisp and chocolate and brownies. I'm not
I did the
joking,
same thing. I did the same thing. I went nuts yesterday.
And how is it not a punishment then? Or a prison if you say you can't do that? Don't do that.
Well, first of all, if you don't like the food that you're eating or that you should be eating, or if you're on a plan to lose body fat, if you don't like that food, even if you're super successful, you'll never maintain it long term because you don't like what you're doing. I love the food that I should be eating. Like I love it, so it's hard for me to like help someone who doesn't like the food they're supposed to be eating. It's much easier to help someone like you who like just wants to eat bad stuff or stuff that they probably shouldn't eat, but they like the food that they're supposed to be eating. That's easy for me.
I love a good steak.
But that's an easy fix for me. Like I have a hard time with people that don't like the good food. That's someone I almost can't even help, So that's where I see people punishing themselves. They think, I shouldn't be eating this. I really want to. Well, that might be okay in the beginning, but once you get on a roll and once you start to see your body change and feel like there's like a sense of mastery that you develop. And I think if you don't develop that sense of mastery, you'll never be successful long term. So I had a client recently, a a client that I train, online client, and he said something to me that was like so. It made me feel like all this stuff was worth it. Like it's my favorite part of the job. He said I gave him the tools to be able to, if he slipped and fell, that he knows exactly how to get back to where he was. And that's what I want people to get out of me, anyway. You know, I give you the tools, and then you can basically, you should be able to get back to where you were, even if you slip a little bit. But yeah, you're giving yourself the gift of being lean, healthy. I don't know. That's the way I see it.
It does feel good, man. It does feel good when I cut sugar. And for someone like, I don't know, I think everybody's a little bit different. I really struggle with the sweets. But what I've found is that it's almost like what I imagine a drug to be like, where the first couple days of like the next couple days, I'm going to refrain. I'm pulling it out, which is hard because I go upstairs to our kitchen and I just see like all the leftover chocolate eggs laying around, the Cadbury eggs with the juicy stuff in the middle. Oh my God. But I'm going to refrain. I'm going to stop. And what I've found is after a few days, like 2 to 3 days of not eating sweets, the cravings go away.
Absolutely. And that's physiological.
I start to feel significantly better when it's not a part of my diet. Like the things
that's not just in your head though.
I know it's a very, very physical thing. All right, let's get away from nutrition for a minute. There's a couple quick rapid fire type questions I want to ask you. And then we're going to wrap it. By the way, before I do, you do online coaching.
Yes.
I know you have a great studio that I go to, but if people want to reach you, the website is B2H, back to health, B, the number 2, H, totalfitness.com, B2H, totalfitness.com. And if people are interested, you and I talked about this earlier, if people are interested in connecting with you, the best way to reach you is through the contact page.
Yes.
Fill out that quick form and you guys will be connected if you want to talk to Craig about it, one of his online coaching programs or whatever. And Craig was very clear with me. That's not why he's doing this. He's doing this because we've had some really good conversations about fitness. I'm doing this 2-part series and I think it'd be fun. But if you're looking to get into shape and you're looking for, and you like the things you're hearing Craig talk about, then, it might be worth a shot. Great way to get back into shape. And again, I want to emphasize, Craig didn't ask for that. That's me giving him a plug because I believe in him. That's why I go see you, Craig. All right.
Appreciate it, Dave.
Real quick. A lot of people listening to this, like me, we travel a lot. And like I'm going to, this is not work related, but I'm going to Australia for 2 weeks to visit my son, who you've trained my son actually a couple times.
Fantastic kid.
He is. Thank you. And what recommendations do you have for people that are traveling? I'm going to be in Airbnbs. There's no gym in an Airbnbs. What do you do to stay fit for 2 weeks when you
can away? Do some pretty, I think bodyweight exercises. Even if all you could do was a simple bodyweight squat and push up, you can make those exercises really, really hard. Like, you can make them brutally hard.
What do you mean with bodyweight squat? Like literally just squatting? Like
just squatting with your body weight. Yeah.
How can you make that really hard?
By going really slow, trying to avoid the easiest parts of the exercise. So the easiest part of the exercise on a squat would be full extension, where you basically could stand forever, right? Most people could stand for hours. So you avoid that. You go maybe 3/4 of the way. Just like, you like try to encourage you to do on the leg press, to go about maybe 80 to 85% of the way without completely straightening your legs. Same idea. And then pause it in the bottom position where your hips are slightly below parallel. You pause for like 2 or 3 seconds in that position, really, really hard. And then you try not to accelerate or excessively accelerate out of that bottom range. Very creepy, slow transitions, top and bottom. Same on a push-up. People say, I can do 50 straight push-ups. No one's doing 50 straight push-ups if you do them the way that I do them.
How do you do them? Tell me.
Similar to the
slow,
squat.
I would imagine.
Similar to the squat. Yeah, like 5-6 seconds on the way down. Pause with your chest. Yeah, pause it with your chest hovering above the bottom. and then go up about, again, 3/4 of the way. So your elbows aren't completely locked out. It's what, so if your goal is to do 50 straight push-ups, do 50 straight push-ups. If your goal is to stimulate chest, shoulders, triceps as efficiently and as effectively as possible with a push-up, then you do it my way.
I love it, man. Good tips. Something that I've found difficult is wall squats. Is that right?
Yeah,
The
wall
wall
squats.
chair, the wall
Yeah,
chair, like just sitting in a chair position against the wall.
Yep.
Very, very hard to do for.
I thought exercise was about movement, though. I thought you had to move to exercise. She's telling me you do phantom chair. I'm not saying you said that. No, that wasn't you. That was just,
yeah.
That's a hard exercise, right?
I understand that leg strength, and this is something I learned recently, that leg strength is a sign of a longevity in life. Do you subscribe to that?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you think about your legs, you hear stories about elderly people falling and breaking their hips, and then they die pretty quickly afterwards,
Yeah.
Mobility is life.
Yeah, that's that was my grandmother's story, by the way. 93. Super active, brain was awesome. She fell, broke her hip. A couple months later, she had passed.
Yeah. And in the animal kingdom, it's move or die. There's no such thing as status quo. It's you either move or die, and mobility is probably the number one factor in at least quality of life. The more mobile you are, as you get older, stay as mobile as possible. And mobility has to do with strength, number one. So if you're not strong, you can't be mobile.
Are you a fan of yoga?
I actually have done yoga and I really enjoyed it, but yoga classes never fit into my schedule. Like my prime time training one-on-one clients is like yoga's prime time for classes, whether it's morning or night or evening. So,
but you subscribe to the concept of working on mobility.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't think you necessarily have to do like yoga to stay mobile, because most of the exercises, if you train full range of motion, you're going to get, you're going to basically work in ranges of motion that you don't do in your daily life anyway. That doesn't mean I don't subscribe to, like, if someone wants to become more flexible, trying yoga or trying whatever they want to try, All
right. Last question.
Sure.
Is there a difference in the things a 20-something should do versus the things a 60-something should do in terms of strength training?
So are you asking, do I train a 20-something person differently than I'd train a 60-something person?
I'm thinking more from the perspective of our listeners. Let's assume that they don't have a trainer. They're going to the gym or doing their own thing. How should someone in their 60s or even early 70s train differently than somebody in their 20s?
I would say the thing that a 60-plus person should do is not do all the stupid things that 20-somethings do in the gym.
For example?
Maxing out, doing like powerlifting exercises, using explosive movements, things that I would recommend against for any age, but 20-somethings can kind of get away with stuff like that. So
what's the difference between maxing out and doing what you do, which is going to fail?
Maxing out would be like picking a weight that you can only do once, powerlifting competition.
Okay.
So powerlifting is a sport, and the bench press, the deadlift, and the squat are the events in powerlifting. Mm-hmm. And your goal in powerlifting competition is to do as much weight as you can do one time on a bench press, squat, and deadlift. So I would never recommend that for anyone. I don't recommend it for anyone. I don't think the juice is, unless you're going to compete, but I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. The risk is not worth it. So I train 20-year-olds. I train people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s the same exact way I train someone in their 20s. Like I trained your son the same way I train you, the same way I train. I trained a client this morning who's 87. Same way.
Who's stronger, my 21-year-old son or me?
You are.
Yeah,
but I've only trained Luke,
answer that.
I've only trained Luke like 3 times. So
all right, fair enough. So one other thing I think is worth noting. We didn't talk about this nutrition thing. You don't drink. You haven't drank in how many years? 17. 17 years. There's quite a bit of Huberman, what's his name? Huberman had
Andrew Huberman. Yep.
He had this podcast that emphasized how bad alcohol is for you. He also did one on cannabis, which isn't quite as good as all the cheerleaders want to make you think it is. I mean, if I had to choose personally, I would probably choose cannabis over alcohol. If I had to choose like actually recreation, I'm going to choose alcohol because it's more fun. But in terms of health and fitness, nothing. Just go to the gym, man. Go for a walk. Like those are the things that are going to be better for you. But you haven't drank alcohol in 17 years. You don't miss it. You told me about the last time you had a glass of wine and you're like, you know what? I think I'm out. Like I'm done.
Exactly. It's exactly what I said. Yep. Yeah.
Kudos to you. That's impressive. I've gone periods of time and I'm like, I will kind of like drinking with my friends. I think it's
But I had a major problem. It's like, I always tell people, if you don't have a problem with it and you don't feel like it's a negative in your life, then, more power to you. It was a huge negative in my life. And that's when I finally, I realized it was, so,
and I'm
not a teetotaler.
I've had some people on this podcast talking about addiction too. Did you fall in that category? Were you addicted?
Oh yeah. I had a problem.
Did you, I don't think we ever went into this in depth. Do you go through a program? Like, were you involved in AA or did you just stop drinking all of a sudden one day? And
I'm not throwing shade at any program. And if someone needs something, then I think that's fantastic. I didn't need anything. And I don't think I'm better than anyone because
you just hung it up one day and you were done.
I hung it up.
That's
I did
amazing.
I did a pro con list and the cons were just so far outweighing the pros. I had little kids. I just hated everything about myself at that point. So, and I knew it was mainly because of drinking.
That's amazing. I don't think we've ever gone that deep into your recovery through that. Like, that's amazing.
Thanks.
And it's very unusual, I think, for people to be able to just go cold turkey and be like, you know what, I'm done. And then not struggle with it. And it sounds like you don't struggle with it at all.
No, I've never missed it. Well, I should say if my wife doesn't drink red wine, but if someone brings red wine to the house and I open it, I'll smell it and be like, oh, I loved red wine so much. And that smell was just amazing. So that's the only time where I'm like, ooh, I'm never tempted to drink it, but it's like, I love that smell,
Does smell good.
Yeah.
All right, Craig Huntington, B, the letter B is in boy, 2, the number 2, H is in Henry, B2H, totalfitness.com. If you want to reach him, click on the contact button.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Craig. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. You're the man.